I want to start out by saying that yes, I am the curator of the exhibitions. However, this whole project is a collaborative endeavor, and I really have to start off by crediting Kristin Skjern before she has to leave, who's the production manager for this entire festival, and Dora Isleifsdottir, who is our graphic designer. We've been a very tight collaboration between us. There have been points in time where they've been more supportive of my ideas than I have, which has been absolutely fantastic. So I just want to start there. The other thing I have to say is that the project in itself is a collaboration. It's, the only way to make this happen is that all the involved institutions, artist run spaces, artist groups have been doing a little bit more than we could expect them to do. So I hope that I'm speaking for, I'm just voicing for a group of people, not just being concerned. I was also, another thing I wanted to say was I was flipping through the regular grapevine, and the sort of edited version of my answer sounded deterministic. And that was not my intent. I was saying something about the previous two festivals, which was more trying to say something of the sign of the times. The two previous festivals were in a time where, in the art world in general, and in Iceland specifically, where a large-scale exhibition could be produced in a different way, where you could have, where perhaps it was relevant to have large-scale exhibitions in a lot of foreign influence. This time we're trying to do something that is more locally hinged and locally connected to the Icelandic scene. That was the two things that I just wanted to start with. So this is the third time American Arts Festival has an initial art focus. So it's kind of like a biennale by now. I don't know what it's a triennale or something like that. And I think it can be relevant to state that in systems. This is kind of, when you've done something 3 times, you start to create a system. You start to figure something, a trajectory of events that have some kind of connection to each other. Yeah, what did I write? The original invitation that was given to us as a brief last summer from this cluster of master spaces and institutions was something along the lines of inviting artist-run spaces into the museums and sort of juxtapositioning the artist-run with the institution. However, there have been quite a few surveys in the last few years of that nature, like No Soul for Sale that was done in New York and at Tate Modern, and for better or worse. In a way, it was felt more relevant to question that way of producing exhibitions, and try to analyze kind of what desire is it that lies behind such a brief, apart from the obvious making a cheap exhibition, filling all the square meters. And I think I came to the conclusion, and this is what we've been working from, that this reflects a desire from the point of view of the institutions for a certain kind of energy, an energy that's created precisely in a collaborative artistic practice, kind of in between artists, or in between, in an atmosphere, I'll use the C word, creativity, where artists are focusing on something beyond their own production, basically. So that felt like a quite intriguing thing to try to investigate within the framework of a large-scale exhibition. Another the fact that the exhibition itself is a collaborative endeavor, and having worked in previous contexts of collaborative nature and interdisciplinary character, there was, I would say, I had an awareness of the fact that this would imply a lot of negotiation and a lot of discussions, and time was short, so perhaps the choice to make that the concept was a way of surviving the curatorial process of making it happen. So instead of just seeing it as an obstacle to get over in order to produce an exhibition, the idea is just to turn it around completely and say, okay, well, this is actually the concept. This is the idea of the show, just to take collaboration to its extreme, this half-art membership. And from that, a lot of things pop up. One of them being perhaps related to, I'm trying to keep this to come back to systems all the time. So one of them being the system of the art world being so extremely focused on single authorship, on single out individuals. And this is not only within sort of the market or whatever is outside the market right now. There's a system within the art world which is still kind of pretty tied to a very Kantian understanding of what art is in terms of enlightenment, sudden illumination, which then is generated into this production of an object with a certain aura. And one means of questioning that is, of course, just to create an exhibition where the entire sort of artistic authorship is not taken out, but as we phrased it here, put in brackets or put in parentheses, just temporarily, and just see what happens. If you can kind of find that in-between space of negotiation, and put that precisely that kind of energy, which I believe there was a desire for. And to do that in Iceland is a luxury, because that energy is present here throughout Icelandic art history. Icelandic art history builds on artists working together, negotiating together. It's very young institutions. I don't know, this institution is from what? Early 90s? Yeah. The National Gallery broke out from the National Museum mid-80s. And I mean, up until that point, it was basically artists who took care of the international exchange and their serious art production. So it's a very luxurious situation to be doing this focus in this specific context. Let me see what I wrote down in my notes. Yeah, another thing about this idea of collectivity and collectiveness is, of course, it's one of those ideas that really easily run away with you. And you get so excited about it and almost a bit romantic about it. And kind of lose track of the fact that, I mean, like all things, it's something that has two sides to it. And this is something that we've also tried to hopefully performatively do in terms of the exhibition itself. Perhaps the best example of that was the performance that we opened the whole exhibition with, that took place in the Kaffistofa, which is this little white petrol station in the middle of nowhere on the way to Kjörgarden, where a former collective, who haven't been working together for 3 years, were invited to reflect on being the other side of the end of the collaboration, so to speak. So they did a delegated performance with the Icelandic actor Hilmar Guðmundsson, which was basically some kind of psychodrama reflection on that fact. So I hope this is clear. And also there's bits and pieces in the more kind of historical parts of the exhibition in National Gallery, which is also I'm thinking now of a work by Enyo, which is showing all the collectors that have died during the last years of supermarket art fair. Then another thing that's interesting, perhaps, that's also part of the sort of systematization of, if I try to break it down in terms of systems, of the exhibition, is trying to look at differences in kind. That means, for instance, and I think this work is going on, but for instance, we had a seminar where we invited a Swedish group called Signal, who've done extensive research of 40 years of artist-run history in the region, and comparing artist-run institutions to other more established or private institutions and public funded, and also seeing what the economic state was in the region at the time, and what politics were in the region at the time. Just making the timeline basically based on these facts, so you see kind of interrelationships between these. And this is also being now transferred to the Doing Art Museum. We now have an office in the National Gallery during the course of the summer doing similar research. But they also did something, Signal, when they did their project. It was a flowchart. And the flowchart is basically an analysis of, how should I put it, the incitament to start collecting. So this kind of generic, very shady concept of artist-run venue suddenly can be split into 5 or 6 different categories according to the system. Did you found this place because you felt that the artwork that you wanted to show was not on display? Did you start because you had a studio that was very large? Did you start because, well, I don't know, it's fun? Did you start because was there a specific political agenda for what you're doing? Were you working with a specific art form? Say, for example, in the 80s when none of the institutions were showing video art, there were a lot of artists that just created their own spaces for showing video art. I think we had this wonderful artist called Stena just the other day, she was talking about why and how her and her husband, Willy Basulka, founded the kitchen in New York in the early 70s. And it was just like, it was just a space. We were kind of surprised when Philip Glass came along and Andy was there, and but basically it was because no one else was showing what they thought was really important to show at the time. So I think that's what I would like to do kind of at this point, on the other side of the opening weekend, and to try and wake up again, is to try to look actually at all of these very practices of collaborative efforts that have been invited to this context, and see if we can somehow find a system of categorizing this otherwise very fluffy idea of collaborative work. And we do have quite a wide range, I think. I think we've tried to cover a wide range of different kinds of or different means for artists, different systems perhaps, of artists put together. And I think the work now is just to try and analyze what that is. So basically, I mean, if the exhibition is a research platform, now we're going to have to see what the conclusion is. I mean, just to be a bit more concrete about it, we have artists here who have been working together for a long time, like Superflex or Learning Site. We have artists who had met for the first time in Reykjavik. Like this group met with Magnus Sigurdsson, Ella Haraldsdottir, Elin Wikström, and Harald Jonsson. We have a former collective. We have artists that operate as facilitators for other artists. We have artist groups that perhaps have in this context been defined as artistic circles, that perhaps we or artists perhaps that are on the verge of becoming artist subjects. I'm thinking, for example, of the Norwegian group 1857, who ran a space in Oslo. But the last show they did was what they said, without artists. What I would say is them as artists. And they took the challenge of being artists in this context. So I think that's something that's really exciting to try to kind of push a bit further and just see if we can find some kind of system of just categorizing this, just slightly nuancing this idea of collective practices. Yeah, I think another thing in the same line of that, I lost my thought.
I have a question if you need one.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you have touched base on it, like a particular model that you were like trying to fit this into, or was this like kind of like completely new?
You mean in terms of inspiration and why it's structured the way it is? Or?
Yes.
Oh, definitely. I answered the question in a very easy way when I had a similar question from Kunstmuseet. The question was basically, artists and curators and exhibitions that inspire the way of producing work, and I just answered for the ones I'm working with right now. But I'll try to give you a better answer. Of course, no, it's true. I mean, that's the most fun stuff. It's really the one that I'm working on right now, and that's not just a phrase. That means that the negotiation involved in the whole kind of, you know this because we've been having a lot of negotiations as this group was invited not to exhibit, and you're all four very, very keen on exhibiting. And we managed to find a compromise where you're both exhibiting and not exhibiting. Definitely, that is the key. That's the key idea of kind of having a structure which is kind of self-generating its own systematicity. But of course, there are sources of inspirations for the way we're working. I would say. It depends on how you go historically, but we have very short-term memory in the art world, and it can be fun to kind of look a bit further back, kind of Baroque exhibition practices, for instance. But maybe to mention a recent example of something that inspired me a lot, that was very close to getting the brief to this, was in last Venice Biennale. I walked around. Given the titles, was Illuminations, and all of the majority of the northern countries were very kind of keen on questioning the nation's fates and the relationship between global politics and national politics, which are totally relevant things to discuss. The Icelandic pavilion of your nation doesn't exist, and all that, right? But then I kind of walked into the Romani pavilion, which is, their nation doesn't exist. They don't have a nation state, they don't have any kind of unifying cultural canon. And they kind of taken the concept and completely changed it. So, and it's a wonderful space. It was Arno Meek who done architecture, and had a series of talks, not completely dissimilar from this project. Starting out with Salman Rushdie and Stalker and other things, and basically just building up the exhibition during the course of the Biennale, and parallel to that, building up a web archive, and just trying to question the culture terms and define the Romani culture in terms of some kind of maybe heterotopic nation. Maybe you can see this parallel to Skopskar Martin's Palestinian embassy in Hot idea. And I thought that was really inspirational in terms of using, on the one hand, having an exhibition that is more sustainable, that is not just made for the press show, but actually endures over time, which is definitely try to be inspired by this, especially in institutional venues. With this project, King of Rhine was putting up new shows every 2 weeks, and with a series of lectures and talks that were all related to the artworks. And then on the other hand, the idea of using the exhibition medium as a kind of starting point, a non-ending point, you know? As a kind of trampoline into a discussion or something like that. So in this case, if I would translate that into what we've been trying to do in this system is not to show collaboration, but rather to inject or kind of create or generate further collaborations. So that would be one answer, which is kind of close at hand. But yeah, I think we're always following and quoting and using, and we should do it. It's conversation. That's important. That was nice for Christmas, isn't it? Christmas. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's always dangerous to quote in a very short text, heavy concepts, like third space. So you're basically asking why I'm talking about third space? Yeah. I think it goes back to, I'm not going to give you a lecture on philosophy now, which happens to be my background. I'm trying to avoid that, but I will be glad to do it later on. I think that the reason why I'm speaking about third space is trying to talk about the exhibition venue as something beyond the objects contained in, rather as precisely this kind of place for some kind of friction. I'm trying to think if what I'm saying is true. It's not Polish purity. Polish purity is like when you say yes on the screen and you say no on that screen and the viewer makes their mind up. Right? That's not really what's going on. It's more, it's two things with the first place. One is that it's a way of also talking about this idea of putting yourself in brackets as not just, it's not only just the ego, it's also creating some kind of friction between the artists within the various constellations. And then the parallel to the first place would be when artists start interacting with each other's surfaces. So for instance, when the main project does a talk here, the kind of authorship of that talk becomes a bit, the contours are a bit unclear, and in that space of it not being clear, then there is possibly a third discourse or a third voice that's generated. So that would be one response. But then it's also kind of On that level, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that this project is kind of perhaps leaking into or generating on structural level, which is not apparent necessarily in this case. I would say one of the better examples is the exhibition Rent Next Door, which is Mele Socornas, who when we got this brief, and the brief, by the way, was basically to all the artists here. Okay, because we didn't know how much money we had when we started, so which was almost 40% of that money. So this is artist fee, so at least we know we're getting paid. And then the brief was, this is how much you can pay, that's €100, and this is what we're doing. This is the concept, and let's do a time frame, B, a plan frame. So the time frame was, and that was all individually to every individual project. So say come December, when we know that we don't have funding, we go from plan A to plan B. Come February, we go from plan B to plan C. And come March, it's $7 billion. Fortunately, most of the projects were under somewhat team planning. We've been really fortunate. But that's basically the way we've been working. And in the case of Mele Socornas, their immediate response was to take, perhaps further than they ever expected, this idea of collaboration and bring it back to their students. Because Gediminas is a professor at MIT in the Art and Technology program. And basically it's a creatives course at MIT for this contest, which is called MIT 4.33333. And we shortened it to 4.333. So that hence the name of the group. And basically MIT supported their research trip to Iceland and Cameroon in February, March. And we also got funding from Council of Arts at MIT. But it was more than we wanted to exchange, because Christian introduced me to the headmaster of the University of Reykjavik. Turns out to be an astronaut. So cool. First I was just so starstruck. I was like, it's been incredible. Anyway, he's an MIT alumni, and there are lots of MIT alumni, it turns out, and suddenly we have this network going on between University of Reykjavik and MIT, which will actually be generating future projects and future collaborations between those two. And then on another level, there was the negotiations with the city itself, because they wanted to get access to Housing House, which is this, in many people's minds, the holy ground. You just don't do art projects in this sacred building. But we just had a great contact with them, and we just fell in love with the many things, perhaps also kind of the power of MIT. This was made possible. And now it seems like this project and this kind of virtual model that they've made out of it will actually turn into a new form of collaboration between the Reykjavik University and MIT. Like a completely new constellation, which I have no authorship over, or this exhibition has no authorship over, but it's kind of just a self-generated future collaboration, I guess, which is really exciting. I think that's a very good example of what's going on, and there are more examples of that. So, we had this dinner in Innovations for the Ocean, and then these little monkeys flying over the table with our addresses. I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to come, new things that are going to come out of this project, which is really exciting. And that might be an answer to what first spaces. Yeah. Trying to be very concrete. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about your role as a creative?
Yeah.
And sort of your background and see yourself as a force in here?
Yeah. The exhibition is so close. It's very hard for me to get the distance to really see, and given the nature of it, it's hard to see what my role has been. I kind of I was thinking about it, maybe I'll do a bit of choreography in this context. So, you know, and the artist, yeah, I think it's a slightly different relationship or maybe not. Maybe that's how we curate exhibitions these days. Surprisingly, it sounds very odd to say, I've never had an artist in the show, but I feel like I had a very intimate discussion with all the artists that participated, which is kind of interesting. So, I mean, Master's content is negotiated. And I guess one reason for that is that pretty early on, I took the decision that it would seem very awkward to do an exhibition on this theme and select artworks in the way that you usually select artworks, kind of like Biennale shopping or something like that. Rather, the idea was to invite the artistic subjects and maybe invite them on the premise of saying, I've seen this, this is the concept, and in my world these fit really well together. What do you think? And then perhaps 10% of the artists end up showing black work, and the other 90% have actually ended up doing commissions, which is also kind of fabulous. And also in terms of struggling with the figures. In terms of funding, and having the majority of the works in the exhibition commissions sounds at first a bit odd, but I think the show would be more expensive if we would have been transported in lines, and it would be a very, very different show. So in that way, I guess I have had a more active role than I would want to admit. Hopefully it's been a role of being a facilitator just as much as, and a negotiator just as much as telling people what to do. I don't know, you'll have to ask the artist on that one. I haven't had too many complaints on that part yet. And also actually, I think having said that, I think it can be good sometimes to push the artist a bit. Just a little bit, you know? Yes.
I was wondering, you said you had a background in philosophy, and do you separate the two, being a curator and your creativity, the artistic side, and your philosophy, or do you kind of try to meld them together as much as possible?
Yeah, right now I feel like I'm really, yeah, that's a good question. Right now I feel like I have more discussions of philosophical value with people connected to the art world than I'm having with people connected to academic philosophy. I feel like there's more, it's something happened like at PhD level, and where it wasn't about the thoughts you were pursuing or the questions you were asking, but it was about who said what on one page and how it stands in relation to what someone else said on another page. Whereas in the art world, for better or worse, the worst being that there's a sort of perhaps absence of critical and historical consciousness. I think, and the positive side being pathos and enthusiasm. I think I try maybe to apply a lot of the questions that I've been trying to pursue in philosophy through sort of these temporary or long-term curatorial projects. And they're definitely infected or informed how we want to see it by that background, definitely. Another thing is, of course, like if you go back to this exhibition of collaboration, that is something that totally very difficult to do within the academic world. Even the academic world, now that we have this research, which somehow, to my mind, should be a bit more collaborative and interdisciplinary to its nature, it's still kind of built on this, even perhaps even more than the art world, built on this idea of single authorship and to us perhaps intellectual property rather than kind of creating knowledge to share with others, which, in terms of philosophy, seems to be very backwards. Yeah. So that's one kind of answer.
I guess I just have a personal question. What are some philosophers that have inspired you most?
Oh, I'm schooled very much in continental philosophy. It's French and German Romanticism, French, early 19th century, mid-19th century philosophy. But also literature. I mean, the quotes, the two only quotes here, I think, really clear is Gross and Baba. Where it's coming from. But I think it's a wonderful, it's an anonymous group that exists outside the museum, and a wonderful book which put me totally off guard. I don't believe that art should have anything in common with definite theories that are apart from it. That's too much like propaganda. I think I would definitely sign under that in terms of the relationship between philosophy and art. And in that way, maybe I'm talking about that kind of philosophy. And this is also difficult to say without sounding like I'm sitting on a high horse, and it's definitely not my intent. But I don't have to prove that I've read the book. You know? I don't have to quote a Gandhi or Adorno to say what I'm trying to say. And sometimes it can be good, those who know the source, they know the source, and those who don't know the source, they can just take it the way it is. And that's probably become one of my attitudes over the last few years. It can kind of throw people off a bit, or set them kind of running into another trajectory, another direction. Or at least I do that when I go through towards the kind of quote things that I think are kind of, well, no, that's not what Heidegger says, he says this and that. And I start reading what the curators actually think. So. That was really personal. Should I say something about the works that are shown in this video? Since we're sitting here? Maybe I should try to say something on the level of systems and stuff. I think before I move into this building, I'd like to mention the MEC group again, because I think that's basically all about systems and creating systems as a way of. I think it was Atla who said it's about becoming the rat that builds its own maze, which I think is beautiful to phrase it. And if you haven't been by their little, what we call it, office on Hafnerslewe, which is just around the corner, you should definitely go there and see an exhibition that's not an exhibition. In terms of, I'll try to describe this work that I'm showing in terms of systems. So here, this work that we're sitting in now, the system of that is basically that I'm participating and I'm also a part of what will be shown on the screens that will manipulate. So basically the idea is to have a series of talks that will circulate around structures and around systems and around method. And they're being recorded, which I luckily forgot. And will then be put up on the screen. So that at the end of the show, there will just be a whole array of screens. epistemology and Schönhausen, who are both working individually and together. They worked together before. The premise for writing them was that Caesar wanted a collective reading, and I thought they had a very interesting approach to, a very interesting critical approach to the question of the Nordic or Icelandic identity, which is another trajectory that can run into the exhibition, given that it is, contains socially engaged artists from this region, and given funding as primarily resources in the Nordic countries. So that's what they're doing. And they've also produced a magazine, which is this one here, called Papa, which they've been produced for Schönhausen, has been produced for quite a while, and what they've decided to do now is a Jubilee edition with 110 artists. So this is what you get when you hear each other. It's my two and again 112. And then right behind me, the sound is Tabla Fram. We have the Demented Diana, Twinklebarn's infected video on that. And Twinklebarn are totally spaghetti into this exhibition structure in terms of being a venue, in terms of being an exhibitor as an artist, in terms of being a partner in crime in making this happen, and in terms of really being a very good conversation partner in the context of the curious exhibition, trying to talk about, okay, what happens if I go show you down people and go to nice and really good thing. So what they're showing here is basically every 2 weeks they will change the exhibitions. And they're all based on a number of video works of artists who have shown them, and I think a few other artists also haven't shown them. But basically it's kind of rotates around spaces. Next to them, in the next room, is this Memory Links project, which is all about systems, I would say. Basically, when they were here on a research trip, they went to the Open House. Were absolutely fascinated by all the hearsay around this house. They decided to make a project that is called the Hearsay House. What they're doing is we had a wonderful tour of the house on the opening weekend, and I hope to have at least one more. And the house is, you could say, triggered with Cold War military mode. You could also say that the house has the hidden senses. So you can see, you can hear, you can smell, taste. There are hidden cameras in the lights. There are Gorbachev's chair and Reagan's chair have movement sensors. So when you sit down, that will have an effect on what's going on over here. There's a little bar with smuggled bourbon and smuggled Russian vodka with a breathalyzer. When you breathe in that, the balloon in there inflates a difference depending on alcohol. There was a propaganda shown there with fantastic material, 16mm material. Niche, which in itself is a very exciting story, which I won't go into now. Part of license was one of the main figures in that. But it's the Russian, which we have, pro-Russian, which we call it, what's the word you call that? Yeah, Friends Association of Services, sort of human Iceland, but they're still like very active space. It's fantastic, really, just like walls of them and taking them and forth. And then there's a similar thing to what you're seeing here, which is basically a facial recognition scan, and so on and so forth. And basically that information is then translated on one hand to this online version of the house, and on the other hand to the museum itself. So this is like the virtual body of what's going on over there. And the fantastic thing is that this is actually going to all the closed meetings in the house, will also be actively generating data to this. Another thing that's going on, so when you sit down on the chair, actually there's a pattern made, and that pattern will be made into models which are really put into sweaters. So because basically a sweater is built
So basically, so they're just employing all of these pretty scary military Cold War technologies and translating them into seemingly innocent, it looks like a children's movie. It's like Tom and Jerry, it's Bill goes up and down. It makes it real, it makes it real. But behind all that is something quite uncanny. So for instance, the facial recognition scan is reading your gender, it's reading your age, it's reading if you're happy or sad, and then it's just translating it into this banal idea if you're Russian or American. But it could be used for something. And then in the far end, in the D room, as it's called, we also had a very interesting project, exciting ride to follow, which mainly involves two artists and a group of people that they keep on attention to. And it's the Icelandic artist Steinunn Eithroth and the Swedish artist James Parcher. When this proposal came in, I was totally intrigued because first of all, it's 20 years between them. I mean, their individual art production is like so different. So it was really exciting to just try to follow that process of negotiation all the way through and how they were kind of involving other people and using other people actually to communicate between the two of them. And it's turned out to be a fantastic installation. Basically investigating ley lines, curry lines, and various alternative forms of fictional and perhaps real scientific experiments. So they had a workshop recently on what housing was. The whole space is kind of built up on these principles. The first thing they did when they came here was to release the cat in this white room, find out where the cat sat down. Because apparently cats prefer to sit in negatively charged energy spots. They also invited a man who's gone through the entire museum and seen what the waving energy is and bad energies, and hopefully done a few things about it. So,
and will be performing.
And his name is Gulur Ottoson. They also Gulur and Auki Oskarsson had also created a sound composition, which is also in the adjacent room. They will be performing at 6 o'clock. What time is it? Not too long, right? Okay, so they'll be performing like right when I shut up. Downstairs. So they took me over the coffee. And okay, it's big enough. And then we have the work that you might miss as you go up to the art collection or down from the cafeteria on the left-hand side, which is a Norwegian group called Institute for Degenerate Art. They were doing a lot of stuff. We didn't really know what they were doing, but they did it. But they ended up doing this little shop window, which is a man that they met here who had a shop in Portland, who now has opened his own store, and then invited him to have a window to showcase his nice clothes. This man is also the former high priest of the Pagan Asa Society, which fits very well practice of what the Institute for Degenerate Art do, mainly commenting on Nordic nationalism and playing around with kind of avant-garde language, twisting and turning and reappropriating these symbols. We also have in the entrance as you come into the museum, we have the Icelandic Love Corporation, who have been working together forever. And they've done a fantastic installation, which is also very kind of research-based. They've been working with these documents for several years now, and on to this installation. And then in the A room, also kind of playing with the texture of the stockings. We have this knitted house by a Swedish group called the New Beauty, which is on the one hand just Victoria Piece, on the other hand a subtle object. Which has kind of come out originally. It was created in the suburb of Stockholm, where this is a very stereotypical apartment. We made like 1 million of those apartments within the course of a few years. And they've come to get a very bad reputation because these areas have very high level of immigration and employment and so on and so forth. So during the renovation process, they inhabited these apartments that they had copied. And together with a group of local women, they taught them how to use the knitting machines, taught them how to make architectural drawings, and basically mapped out an entire copy of the apartment, including scratches on the walls and defects, to kind of turn, how should I put it, the private home into the public space, kind of just playing around with these two notions, which is basically what the Beauty Council is doing a lot, pointing at the fact that architecture is not really buildings. They also did a fantastic walk through the city, just prior to the opening, where we were walking through customs and coming out of the tax office and walking through the bank and in the bar. It was an absolutely beautiful walk. It's kind of like the opposite of parkour, rather than occupying your inhabiting space. And then we also have outside the building this architectural element, which is a part of the building itself, this white construction. There's an anonymous group of artists who have written a manifesto, and it's basically the 12 steps of Anonymous Alcoholics, but it's transposed into a manifesto for anonymous art production. You could say simply that alcohol is being substituted by the art world, and the art is being substituted by art in the cafe, which I think is a beautiful piece. And then we are also downstairs, which is not up right now, simply because it's in the Nordic House, but will be up on the left hand side. So you have the regular shop of the museum. On the left hand side, there will be an artist from bookstore who will be having a showcase of some of the publications. So that's basically what's going on in this building. Any questions on that, or should we let the concept begin? Any questions? Yeah? Kind of. Maybe a little bit. Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry I pushed over the time.